Kelvin, and then the discussants. So, Kelvin, Chiweshe, I apologize if I don't pronounce your name well. Is a junior lecturer of philosophy, ethics, and human development at the University of Zimbabwe and a doctoral student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. He teaches modules in logic and critical thinking, applied ethics, social and political philosophy, ethics and philosophy of science. His research interests are in capability approach, development ethics, and environmental ethics. His doctoral studies focus on capability approach and environmental justice policies in Zimbabwe, particularly how environmental policy can be anchored on envisioned as the ecosystem capabilities and human capabilities. He is also a coordinator for the HGCA thematic group on ethics and development. So I will just move on to the discussion today. Dr. Matthias Kram, are you there?
Yes.
Right. You're welcome, Doc. I just read the bio quickly and just give the space to speak. Matthias Kram holds a doctorate in philosophy from Utrecht University. Since 2024, he has been a researcher and a lecturer at the Chair for Ethics, Philosophy and History of the Life Sciences at the University of Tübingen. His research focuses on environmental ethics, political philosophy, intercultural philosophy. All right, so I'm just going to give space for Kelvin to speak to us for 30 minutes, after which our discussant, Dr. Matthias, you also speak to, you reflect on the presenter's presentation for 10 minutes, after I leave the space for us to ask our questions. Kelvin, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we do.
All right, cool. So thank you so much for such a very, broad introduction. Now let me dive deep into my paper. Oh, by the way, greetings everyone. It's nice to meet some faces I've seen at the HDCA conference. So nice to reconnect again. So let me dive into the paper. So the structure of the paper or the presentation is such that I'll give you a brief background of the happenings in Zimbabwe currently, and as well as the key line of argument, then explore some case studies. Then I will move on to my argument or my idea of ecosystem capabilities and how they can be incorporated into policy. Right. So the background to this research is that mining contributes a great deal to the Zimbabwean economy, and in Zimbabwe, one of the key minerals that is being mined is lithium. And lithium is a key or a crucial mineral or crucial resource for just energy transitions, as it can be used for electric vehicles and other technologies that are environmentally friendly. But then here is the catch. While we're striving for electric vehicles and other environmentally friendly technologies, in the local communities where the lithium is mined, there are a lot of environmental hazards and environmental injustices that are perpetuated as a result of the extraction of the resource. So the paper tries to solve this problem of environmental injustice and ecological injustice from the perspective of ecological capabilities. So I think before I make my argument, it is also important to define key terms and to distinguish between some very closely related terms, such as environmental justice and ecological justice. So environmental justice is basically about the fair distribution of environmental resources benefits and burdens, and the fair participation of all members of community in environmental governance, and equal protections of all citizens under environmental laws. Right. So basically, environmental justice has got three dimensions, which are the dimension on distribution, then the other one on recognition and procedural justice. So everyone has a right to a safe and clean environment and the right to participate and also to be recognized in terms of what they value in the environment, because what is valued in the environment can be sometimes culturally informed, because people have different ways to relate to the environment, and what they value in the environment may be relative to their cultures. So basically, environmental justice is primarily concerned about, human well-being in terms of how you relate to the environment or the quality of the environment around you. Then ecological justice is a concept that is related to environmental justice, but speaks to the idea of fair relationships between humanity and the ecosystem as a whole, or other non-human species within the ecosystem. So these are central terms in my discussion. So my argument basically is that you cannot achieve environmental justice without accounting for ecological justice. So in other words, I'm saying environmental justice requires ecological justice for it to materialize. That's the line of argument, basically. So apart from focusing on environmental justice or human well-being, we must also focus on ecological well-being, because the ecosystem is critical for human flourishing. Because we cannot have environmental justice in a dead planet or in a dead ecosystem. So that's basically the line of argument. So I'll explain the argument later, but for now, let me move to the few case studies and the issues around environmental justices and injustices and the ecological injustices that are perpetuated by mining in Zimbabwe. So mining in Zimbabwe is basically dominated by Chinese investors. Right? So the first case that I'm going to look at is one from Bikita, right, where there is a company called Bikita Minerals, which specializes in lithium mining. So Bikita Minerals has committed quite a number of injustices, and one of them is unfair displacement of the traditional occupants of the land, or the communities that were primarily occupying the land that was later discovered to have the lithium. Right? So they displaced the inhabitants and promised to refund them, but eventually did not refund them or restore their households. They did not do that. In some cases, the compensation was inadequate, so to speak, right? So this is a case of an injustice in terms of distribution, where some people are getting more benefits while some are getting burdens from the mining activities, right? And also there is ill recognition or misrecognition of the beliefs of the local communities in terms of what they value in the environment. And there is also lack of procedural environmental justice, right? As the local communities are not necessarily involved in the decision making, or maybe their involvement is what I can call pseudo involvement, right? So these are serious environmental injustices. And also in Bikita, there is a dam called Matesha Dam, and this dam is a source of livelihood for people in Bikita, because they use the water from the dam for irrigation purposes, for their subsistence type of farming, and also their cattle drink from the dam. But then, due to the operations of Bikita Minerals, the dam has been contaminated with a substance or a toxic substance, which was unnamed in this case, but it contaminated the dam, leading to death of cattle and even death of aqua life, like the fish and other organisms that live in that dam, right? So this reflects an environmental injustice because the people depend on fishing, they depend on farming, and they also depend on cattle rearing, but all this has been disturbed due to the activities of the mine. And also, it is an injustice to the ecosystem as some non-human entities of the ecosystem have been destroyed. Right. So the organization or the company later on took some measures to, undo the damage, but it is said to have been insufficient. And also, it has to be noted that, sometimes these organizations or these companies are made to pay fines by the Environmental Management Agency, but the fines are sometimes too little to compensate for the damage done. Right. So basically, these are the cases in Bikita. Then there is another one in Buhera. So in Buhera, there is a mine called SARCHI-HEHD mine. It was established roughly 5 years ago, and it specializes in lithium mining, right? So this mine, first and foremost, it destroyed it destroyed graves of the people who had been buried in these in the area before. Destroyed graves, and graves are culturally significant to the Shona people because they are regarded as sacred. And in these exhumations and all, this created psychological stress for the local inhabitants of the land. And also, SARCHI-HEHD mine is said to have contaminated groundwater, as some bores had been tested and they have been detected to have a harmful or a toxic substance. The bore water had, toxic substances that have originated from the mining activities of this SARCHI-HEHD mine. So all this is coming or is as a result of trying to extract a mineral which is lauded for these transitions to eco-friendly energy sources and the idea of electrical vehicles, etc. So it is quite an irony, so to speak, right? So basically, these are the case studies or the problems that are, or just a glimpse of the problems that are experienced by people and non-human species within the ecosystems where mining is taking place in Zimbabwe. So I chose only two, but there are quite a number, and there are different types of issues and concerns in terms of how these Chinese investors are operating in the country and how this affects the well-being of the people and the non-human species. Right. So my basic line of argument is that for us to attain ecological, for us to attain environmental justice, we require a sense of ecological justice, right? So how do we attain a sense of ecological justice? My argument is that we can always incorporate ecological well-being by focusing on it from the perspective of the capability approach, right? So the idea is simply an extension of the capability approach to include non-human species. So the basic idea here is that, or the obvious is that, the capability approach, when it was formulated or conceptualized, was basically a human well-being framework, or a framework of human well-being and a framework of well-being of human individuals, right? So the main idea of the capability approach is that in assessing well-being, we are supposed to look at how each and every individual is flourishing or is functioning within the society, right? Not looking at a collective of or an aggregation of how individuals or a community is flourishing. So further refinements into the capabilities approach would require us, or I would propose further refinements which considers the well-being of non-human species and the well-being of systems such as the ecosystem, right? So maybe you would require some key ideas from the capability approach, that the capabilities are freedom to be and do various things a human being or an individual has reason to value, and functionings are the actual achievements that a person obtains. Right? So the difference between capabilities and functionings is basically in the realistically possible and the realized. Right? So my idea is that the capabilities approach is or has had an interaction with the environment from its inception. The primary idea looks at the environment primarily as a conversion factor, right? The conversion factor is simply the conditions that enable or disable a person from achieving or attaining fulfilling their capabilities or fulfilling their desired level of functioning, right? So you also note that Mother Nussbaum extends the capabilities approach to include non-human species at first, including only animals, and the criteria that she uses is sentience. By sentience, she means the idea or the ability to feel pleasure and pain. So according to Nussbaum, other non-human animals that can feel pleasure and pain must be accorded capabilities and freedoms in the same way as human beings, because they can feel pleasure and pain just as human beings. Right? So that's a criteria. But then I've seen sentience is also one way of discriminating. It's a form of discrimination. And also, David Slosberg criticizes Nussbaum for extending the capabilities approach to only some parts of the ecosystem, as these are sometimes inseparable. Right. So I move on to the idea of ecological capabilities or meta capabilities. So the idea of ecological capabilities is not really an idea that has been developed so much. So it starts from
Hi, Kelvin.
Just asking for
Yes. Can you hear us? Yes. Dr. Matthias, can you hear us?
I can hear you well, but it seems that Kelvin was frozen.
Yeah, I can also hear, but yeah, there's a problem, I think, on Kelvin's end.
I think Kelvin is having some technical issues. We are hopeful that he's to join us very soon. And then we can check on the screen so we can get somebody put something. Even though it's one. As we wait for Kelvin, if there's anyone who has any questions that he or she will ask, you can ask in the chat box. While we wait, we could ask Matthias to tell us Hi, Dr. Graham.
Hi.
As we wait for Kelvin to just show up, can you just reflect on his but I don't know if you have access to
Yeah, I just wrote a WhatsApp message to him. I'm not sure if he will respond, but I mean, I've got a couple of slides, so I mean, we could also wait 1 or 2 minutes, and I don't know if he returns, and then I could just present the slides. I don't know what would be best for you.
Dr. Matthias, can you just tell us about your work?
About my work, yes. Just an update. Kelvin just wrote me back on WhatsApp that he's trying to get back. Yeah, I mean, my work currently is here at the University of Tübingen, working mostly on rights of nature and biodiversity ethics. So this is also why Kelvin asked me to do a response, because of these overlaps between environmental justice and ecological justice. So there is, of course, a clear move once you get into the rights of nature approach, into the question how ecosystems can have moral value, and what this means then for legal approaches. And of course, yeah, there's lots of ambivalence, but also lots of potential in rights of nature. So it's not necessarily a silver bullet. But so this is what I'm trying to work out. How can rights of nature be helpful? How can ecological justice be helpful? If we look at the biodiversity crisis we have today. So this is my main work.
Thank you.
Don't know if
Hello.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm very sorry for that. There's been a network challenge at my office. So I think I'm back now. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So my idea was that I left off from the idea that the environment possesses intrinsic value, or it is valuable on its own. Its value does not depend on human needs or on human values. Right? So my main argument is that there is need to formulate ecological capabilities, or the freedoms that the ecosystem can enjoy, in the same way we understand human capabilities, right? So there are quite a number of ways in which we can have these ecological capabilities. And basically, one of them is to choose or to follow the format of Nussbaum, to have the capability of bodily health, and explore how ecosystems can have or can experience bodily health, right? So before I move to the ecological capabilities, there's also need to understand that ecological flourishing is quite a difficult concept, but there is need to find a way to find a working kind of concept to account for the flourishing of the ecosystem. Right. So one way to do this is through ecological capabilities. And the ecological capabilities can speak to either specific ecosystems. For example, the river can be considered as an ecosystem, or the savanna woodland can be an ecosystem, right? And the planet as a whole can also be understood as an ecosystem. So the basic idea is that you can conceptualize these capabilities to look at specific ecosystems or to the planet as a whole, right? And also it has to be noted that these are not capabilities for individual or particular non-human species. These are capabilities of the system.
Hi, Kelvin.
Of course. It's very important.
We still lost Kelvin once again, and so I think that I'll just give the space to.
No, but then if Kelvin isn't there, you can't hear.
No. But yes.
Yeah, but if he responds and Kelvin isn't there, then what's the point? I mean, I don't know what people think, but if the idea is for Kelvin to also then respond to what the discussant has said.
Because there are these technical issues today.
All right, our online viewers, we are so sorry for the issues we are having today. It's not always the same. We just have to. It's all about some of the inconveniences that we face in this era. So let's just stick together and then hold on for Kelvin to reconnect so that we can have a productive session. Thank you.
Sorry. Like what? I was having some questions, not for him, and I wasn't here when.
But as we wait for Kelvin, if there's anyone who has any questions or any reflections on whatever Kelvin was sharing, you could just speak to us. Yeah. Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I was thinking, so maybe I should just think aloud here now. Maybe I stepped out when Kelvin started his talk, but I was wondering if the distinction made between ecological justice and environmental justice was clear enough. I was not here, but I would love to hear that distinction more clearly, because my assumption, I've been issued that, what would be the difference there? I don't know if someone can help.
He did give a breakdown of dimensions of environmental justice and then explained how he saw ecological justice differently.
It would be interesting for me to know better what the differences are, really, because I'm not sure. What do we do in the event that we cannot? Notice.
I think for me, the way I heard him and the way I explained it to myself, because I was having the same challenge. I think he bases his distinction on the way the environment or the concepts relate to human beings, because the environmental injustice or justice it reflects taking care of the environment for people that benefit from that particular environment and the resources. But with ecological, I think he explained it as taking care of the environment for the environment itself. So I think that's how I understood.
That understanding will raise a lot of questions for me. I mean, can there be any kind of taking care of the environment for the sake of the environment without contextualizing within human relations with it? I mean, that would be problematic for me. Is there a way we can think of the environment as a whole without situating human beings and their well-being around it? It's going to be.
Maybe it's his argument. Maybe we should
you offer to help out.
You start thinking about the environment as you know, in the non-living, non-human species as an entity on their own without really attaching them to human. I think that's what he was saying.
But now I'm curious to hear how you would then make the distinction.
How I would make it.
Yes, if you have questions around this one and the one that was explained by Benela, what would be like the ideal way in your view to? Because I also have I'm also trying to grapple with the two distinctions.
Okay.
But now I'm curious to hear yours.
Yes, I have not thought of it. That's why I've been asking questions. But if I am not able to make that distinction, then I'll collapse them. It's because for me, I've not really seen, and I really feel bad. I wasn't here when it started. So I would love to know what the distinctions are, if there are any.
What did you say?
I mean, it will be nuanced if there are.
Yeah, Chris says maybe he would have presented this ecological, environmental justice seem to be promoted by the state.
Yes. What would we can do if he's not doing that?
If he doesn't manage to come back at all, we might want to just put a cap on how much time we're willing to wait for him, especially if there isn't further correspondence via WhatsApp to indicate him joining.
Or we ask Matthias to
Chris,
go
you
ahead.
can speak.
Or where's Matthias to just
Thanks, Gloria. I heard you reading half of my question. So my question, actually, I don't know, maybe he was going to say this as he was presenting. So I just wanted to hear his comment on, because as he was presenting, he was coming as if his ecological or environmental justice is promoted mainly through police or by the state. So I wanted just to know now, since he's talking about Zimbabwe and the places that is mentioning mining lithium, and recently the government raised a ban of raw lithium and other minerals. So I wanted just to know if, in his view, or could this be part of the government's efforts towards environmental justice, or what? Thanks.
Can I add something? I think we need to recognize that Kelvin is trying to develop an argument, and we've only heard half or three-quarters of the argument, which makes the response quite difficult. But I agree with others that there's not a clear, he's not yet providing a clear enough account of what he means by ecological capabilities and ecosystems, and where, because even in Nussbaum's Justice for Animals, with sentient animals, the capabilities are still individually held, even if they might be important for a species. So I think there's quite a bit of work that Kelvin needs to do to sort out what he means by ecological capabilities and how he works that out in relation to a whole ecosystem. The challenges he's not, and whether he then understands the relationship between human beings and non-human life in an instrumental way, a fundamentally anthropocentric way, or in some other way. So, but he's not had time to fully develop that argument, and I think we need to recognize that. If I can just say something about the lithium mining, that was about trade. That was about trade influence. That had nothing to do with environmental justice. Because if the state really cared about environmental justice, it would not be allowing the massive ecological degradation that goes on in Zimbabwe around different mining enterprises. So that was very much about trade levers. I think probably primarily directed at the United States. I could be wrong, but I would be very, very surprised if this has anything to do with ecological justice, because there's no pattern that one can see of that in relation to mining. And then the last thing, I think, Kelvin is back. I was going to say, if he's not back, let's listen to Matthias. But I see he's back. Hi, Kelvin.
Hello. Yeah, I'm back. I've connected with there's something happening with my laptop.
Yeah, Kelvin, are we still? Hi, Kelvin.
Hi. So let me.
All right, Kelvin, can you just wrap up with your presentation? Let's just have the key ideas and what you want us to get from the presentation, after which I give the space to Dr. Fram to also speak.
Okay, so my idea, or the basic idea, is that ecological capabilities have got to be incorporated in regulatory frameworks and environmental, policy in Zimbabwe. And one such way of incorporating them is to come up with environmental or ecological resilience assessments to couple with the current environmental impact assessments. So these would basically right. And another way would be to, instead of using the polluter pays principle, that another way would be to have mining investors deposit some funds to say, just in case your project degrades the environment, these funds must be on reserve for you to restore the damages that you do to the ecosystem. And also another way would be to have ecological corridors that promote, migration of other species to or from the mining area. So these ecological corridors would be left surrounding the mining areas, so that if there are other species that had been surviving in the mining areas, they could have a place to migrate to. This promotes resilience and biodiversity, as other non-human species can flourish in the ecological corridor. And also we can have ecological safe zones that can be set aside around the mining regions, so as to promote ecological resistance for the ecosystem to function after and during the mining operations. I think these are the main points.
All right, Kelvin, thank you so much for your presentation, and we are sorry for the network issues you're experiencing. Dr. Matthias, over to you.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much to Kelvin also for sending me his paper in advance, so I had an opportunity to give it a read, and I really enjoyed reading it. And I just would like to do a quick, basically a quick summary, and then say a few things where I completely agree with Kelvin, and then ask a few questions where I think that it might be useful to maybe have a second look. So Yes, Kelvin's paper is called Exploring the Potential of Ecological Capabilities as a Framework for Environmental Justice in Zimbabwe's Mining Regions. I think you can see my screen, hopefully.
Yes, we can.
That's good. Then I go to the first slide. And this is the case studies that Kelvin has already described in detail, so I won't go into them because he knows much more about them than I do. What I just would like to point out is the issues of justice or the moral problems that Kelvin examined in these cases. So lithium extraction as an example of green extractivism is there, misrecognition and exclusion of minority groups from decision making, unfair environmental burdens of environmental transformations, displacement, water and air pollution, biodiversity loss and health risks. So a long list of injustices and ethical issues that emerge in these case studies and that might need to be addressed by a moral or ethical framework or even a framework of justice. Then the thesis is that Kelvin defends is that environmental policies and mining regulatory frameworks in Zimbabwe should be made in line with ecological capabilities to address these problems. So ecological capabilities should become part of these policies and frameworks. And of course, there are different ways to talk about capabilities. Capabilities have their origin in the work of Amartya Sen and also very much in the work of Martha Nussbaum. Capabilities as the real freedoms of individuals to achieve certain doings and beings they have reason to value, very much from a human perspective, functionings being the achieved doings and beings. And Nussbaum's list, she has in her original list already 2 capabilities that deal with other species and the control over one's environment. And at one point in Frontiers of Justice, she extends them to non-human animals. And in her most recent book, Justice for Animals, she even does so more in depth. This is one approach, extending capabilities to non-human animals. Then Kelvin also mentions Brina Holland's approach, the environment as meta capability, which moves away from the idea that environment is just a conversion factor, which may be too little. But meta capability then is criticized by Ingrid Robains as potentially the wrong category. So maybe environment cannot be a capability because it deals with freedoms, it deals with doings and beings. So this is a bit the, let's say, little debate that has been going on between Brina Holland and Ingrid Robains. I mean, it's not a huge debate, but it's maybe a bit of an open question whether it's possible. Kelvin, however, then moves on to the idea of ecological capabilities, and he draws on David Schlossberg and on Thea Kortet-Mäki. So this is basically the idea that ecosystem capabilities can be identified that are grounded in ecological processes. So David Schlossberg does this based on integrity. So basically the condition where these ecological processes function properly as a whole. And there are 2 problems that I would identify. Integrity can appear static or hard to operationalize. It's also something that Kelvin notes in his paper. The second one is, do capabilities actually presuppose freedom? So going back to the definition on the previous slide. Then there's Thea Kortet-Mäki. She works with resilience, and resilience has an advantage. It focuses on the adaptive capacity under disturbance of an ecosystem, and therefore it better fits the dynamic non-equilibrium, let's say, aspects of ecosystems. So this is also why Kelvin then chooses Kortet-Mäki as, let's say, the approach for ecological capabilities. And then the implications for policymaking. Kelvin already addressed what can be done currently with environmental rights, the human rights, the polluter pays principle, and then proposes to integrate ecological capabilities so that we can ensure that ecosystems can regenerate and maintain their core ecological capabilities. He proposes that there is a prior deposit instead of a fine for reparation costs. So basically, there's already money available instead of just determining the sum after damage has already been done. Then ecological resilience can ensure that ecosystems can recover after disturbance, or at least, let's say, people can take measures, or the corporations, that these ecosystems can recover. And finally, there's this duty to preserve undisturbed ecological corridors, which then would lead to a higher threshold. And I think this is a very good point. I think, and I agree with Kelvin, that ecological capabilities would indeed allow for a higher threshold for protection of ecosystems. And this is also going back to the first slide relating to the case studies, that they would facilitate a higher threshold for water and air protection against biodiversity loss and addressing health risks. So I think this would be something that ecological capabilities could do in these situations. And the prior deposit could also mitigate that there are unfair environmental burdens of environmental transformations. So corporations would already have to deposit a certain amount of money, and in this way be responsible or accountable for the damage that they could do. I've some questions that also goes back to the case studies, but I don't know, of course, Kelvin's paper was a draft version, if this is already something that is going to be included. But for me, the questions were that some of the underlying issues of justice and ethical issues that Kelvin identified would potentially require a broader framework. So there's lithium extraction, so this idea of green extractivism, that lithium is extracted for the energy, let's say, for green energies or for implementing green energies in the global north. So here I think there's a decolonial issue that might not be easy to address with capabilities. Then there's misrecognition and exclusion of minority groups from decision making. So issues of procedural justice and recognition are coming to the fore. And then displacement, and here a rights-based approach might also do some work. So for me, the question is, if we rightly and with Kelvin use ecological capabilities to address what's happening to ecosystems, maybe we could supplement this with these issues of decolonial justice, recognition, procedural justice, and a rights-based approach to also address these other issues. And the final question, but this is somehow an open question. I've not really made up my mind myself on this question. Can ecological capabilities completely avoid reproducing the separation between human beings and nature? So Kelvin talked about environmental justice versus ecological justice. And for me, the question is, can ecological capabilities already bridge that gap? Or is there still some further conceptual work to do? So far from my part, thank you very much for having me. And thank you very much for this very exciting paper from Kelvin. I now stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
All right, Doug, thank you so much for your reflection. Kelvin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you can just respond to discussants. You have 5 minutes.
All right. So the first question, or the first point to ponder on, is whether capabilities or the ecological capabilities can bridge the gap or the separation between the human beings and the ecosystem. I would say capability or ecological capabilities on their own cannot bridge that gap. So there is need for maybe a hybrid sort of approach which incorporates the interests of human beings and the ecosystem. And this hybrid approach would be, connecting ecological justice to environmental justice, not looking at each of these in isolation, because looking at them in isolation would simply perpetuate this, dichotomy to say human well-being, ecological well-being, as if these are separate. And also another way to think about this is to think of human beings not necessarily as separate from the ecosystem, but as being part of the ecosystem, right? And not to consider the ecosystem or the environment as something that is outside or apart from ourselves, but as something that is connected to us and to our well-being, right? Then another idea is that, you know, these or the second question, or the second point of reflection was on the need for broader concepts for conceptualizing these issues, such as displacement, procedural justice, etc., etc. Yeah, truly, I would agree. It would require a broader framework, but also I felt like, you know, some of these issues like displacement, procedural justice, etc., they require maybe a separate project. But of course, here I just, you know, looked at them from the perspective of, you know, how they are connected to environmental injustice. But surely they are very important, and there is need for a broader framework to, you know, to cover all those. But it may be impossible to cover all of them in one project. That's my submission. Thank you.
All right, Kelvin, thank you so much for your response. Our online participants, you can just ask your questions if you have any questions to ask. Because of the network issues we had to extend our session a little bit for 10 minutes. So you have any right to ask a question if you want to. Okay, let me come in-house. If there's anyone who has a question, you can ask Kelvin. Thank you, Prof.
Thanks, Gloria. Thank you, Kelvin. I've got a question about your take on relationality. And this follows the webinar. I think it took place last week, where there were presenters talking about the nature relationship index that's currently under development. So I thought to ask you if you have any views on that proposal, and or if you're thinking of incorporating relationality more centrally in your proposed solutions. Thanks.
All right, Kelvin, you can respond to that.
All right, so, well, I didn't attend the previous webinar on relationality, but I would suppose that, you know, the idea is basically on the relation or the connection between nature and human beings, which I think is very valuable, which is why I proposed a hybrid, you know, theory of justice, which considers the interests of ecosystems or non-human animals and non-human entities and the human beings. So that sort of hybrid conception of, you know, ecological and environmental justice would also incorporate the idea of relationality, because humans cannot live in isolation from from nature, and nature also requires the input of human beings. Somehow there is a mutual relationship between human beings and nature. So I think, yeah, relationality is a valuable input.
All right. All right.
Kelvin, thanks for your presentation, despite the difficulties of connection, and Matthias for your comments, I thought, which really added value to the session. I think just in light of the conversation we were having while we were waiting for Kelvin to reconnect, Kelvin, it would be useful for us just to ask you to reiterate your distinction between environmental justice and ecological justice.
All right. So I said environmental justice speaks to three things. The first one is the fair distribution of environmental burdens and benefits. The second one is the equal protections of all people under environmental law. And the third one is, or maybe I would say 4. The third one is the recognition of all people's values in terms of how they relate to the environment. And then the equal participation of all people in environmental governance or in making decisions that affect their environment. Then ecological justice is about the fair relations between human beings and non-human beings in the ecosystem, or the relationship between humanity and the ecosystem at large. There has to be a fairness in terms of how we relate to the ecosystem. We shall not consider it, or the idea of ecological justice is we must not use the ecosystem as a mere means to our own flourishing, right? Of course, we can use it as a means to our own flourishing, but as a mere means, not as a mere means to our own flourishing, right? There is a difference. So ecological justice is basically about how we relate to other non-human species.
Other species.
That's all.
All right, Kelvin.
Kelvin, thank you very much for your presentation. And then of course Matthias for discussing the paper. Mine is a follow-up, and then from what Fenella asks about the distinction between environmental justice and ecological justice. And then you have shown that the way I understand what you said is that both seem to be human-centered. And if this is true, I still have not been able to place my finger on the difference between the two. I know the work may be ongoing, but I will suggest that maybe for the ecological justice, the nuance should be made more clearly. That's what I think. But because both are human-centered, and I still struggle to place my finger on the difference.
Kelvin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
All right.
I'm wrap my head around the question. Like briefly, what's the question? I feel like you're saying the distinction is not so clear.
Yes, Kelvin, thank you. Yes, I was saying that both seem to be human-centered, the way you describe both environmental justice and ecological justice. If my claim is true that both are human-centered, then what exactly is the difference? Or perhaps you want to think about it more later.
The difference of what?
Between ecological justice and environmental justice.
All right. So I would say the difference basically is in the subjects of justice, or in the community of justice. Who enters the community of justice, or who must be considered for justice, right? So you would notice that the distributional justice theorists such as John Rawls, they argued that justice is a purely, human concept, whereas ecological justice extends justice to non-human species. So it's not human-centered. It extends the community of justice to include the ecosystem, to include non-human species within the ecosystem. Whereas, environmental justice does not consider the ecosystem as a subject or as an object of justice, but as something that can be used for human ends, or as a resource, so to speak.
All right, Kelvin.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Kelvin, we want to thank you so much for your insightful presentation. I think there's a question here.
Let me just a comment suggestion.
Oh. Okay, so Kelvin, you have a suggestion here from Prof. Mika. She says an aspirational approach to planetary futures. In case you are interested in work currently being developed on the NIRI Nature Relationship Index. Okay, so Kelvin, this is something that will help you as you reflect on your paper. Okay, we want to thank you so much for your time sharing that insightful topic with us. It is very, very stimulating, and we want to thank you so much for honoring our invitation. And also we want to thank our discussant, Dr. Matthias, for your presence with us today. It's been a wonderful moment with you. And then we also acknowledge that we have actually extended our time for a long while, and you are here with us. And so we want to thank you so much. And our online participants, we want to thank you so much for sticking closer. In spite of these network issues, you were with us, and then you made the session a wonderful one. So we want to thank you so much, and we are hopeful that the next session is going to be a very wonderful one as well. All right.
Thank you so much.